Hello and welcome to this UniField tutorial video. In this video we're going to focus on how to encode a return to stock. And this is going to use a function that is often called the incoming shipment from scratch. It also is called a return from unit. And the basic purpose of this transaction is it's a way for us to encode in UniField items that were originally sent from a stock location in UniField to an external consumption unit, or another name for that is to one of the clients. And for one reason or another, the client has decided they do not need the items and they want to return the items to be managed in stock in UniField. So this functionality, the incoming shipment from scratch, allows us to encode that transaction, indicate that the items are returning from a client to a stock location in UniField, and additionally, this transaction correctly updates the average monthly consumption for the items that are being returned so that UniField does not think these items were consumed when in fact they were actually returned to stock. So, when is the appropriate time to encode an incoming shipment from scratch? As I mentioned before, it's when the items are going to be returned to stock, a stock that is managed in UniField, from an external consumption unit. And this can often be the staff health, or one of the activities, the hospital, the pharmacy, the office, the guest houses, etc. Each mission and each location has its own set of clients that are also known as external consumption units. When do you not use this function? This function is not intended to be used to encode the reception for a donation or a loan. And it's also not intended to be used to encode the receptions of items from a supplier. Both of these, loans, donations, and items coming from an external supplier, should always have a purchase order linked to them, and that purchase order would create the incoming shipment automatically. So really the only time you want to use this functionality is when we have items that were already sent from stock to a client, and the client has decided that some or all of those items need to be returned to UniField to be stock managed. So with that in mind, we're going to go over to the sandbox and begin the demonstration. So here we are in the sandbox, and for this example in this video we're going to be using the coordination sandbox for the Bangladesh mission. And as I mentioned before, when we're going to encode a return from a client to the stock, we start with the incoming shipment, and that is going to be found, of course, in the warehouse, and then in the incoming shipments. And as also I mentioned, this will be the only example when you will create the incoming shipment new. So what we also call that an incoming shipment from scratch. And that simply means that there is no purchase order linked to this incoming shipment that generated automatically the incoming shipment. So we start with the new button, create a new record. And it'll open up a draft incoming shipment, and the first thing we have to do is encode the header information, and then the second step will be to indicate the specific items that are being returned. So we start with the blue fields that are mandatory, and you can see that this one is the expected receipt date. So generally you encode the date that you expect to receive the items back physically and return them to the stock. So we're going to say that this is going to happen today in our example. The next field we need to fill in is the origin field. Normally this would be automatically filled in with the purchase order number and the IR number, but in this case, because we're not linked to those documents, we indicate specifically a small description of where these items are coming from and what is the purpose of this transaction. So in this case, I'm going to put medicines from the staff health return. just a small description, or it can indicate who validated it, Medco, mission pharmacist, etc. But it's nice to have a small description explaining the purpose for encoding this transaction. Afterwards, you'll see here on the external consumption unit field, you need to select which client the items are being returned from. So you have, in this case, we have the coordination office, staff health, and kit replenishment. So these are going to be items that were returned from the staff health that need to go back into the medical stock. So we indicate staff health. There's no purchase order number, so we leave that blank. And then we come over to the reason type field, and let's look at what our options are here. This is what is defined as a return from unit. So you're going to want to select number 4. It's coming back from a unit, which is what an external consumption unit is, kind of the technical definition for that. So we'll select number 4, and that's what helps it understand that it needs to update and calculate properly the average monthly consumption for the items that we are having returned. So once you've properly encoded all the information at header level, it's time to add the items. So as you've experienced on the IR and the FO, there's several ways to add items. You can use the New button, one item at a time. You can use the Add Multiple Lines button, or you can use the Import Lines. Today I'm going to demonstrate the New and the Import Lines function, which I think these are the two best options for adding items to a document. So in the case of if it's only one item, for example, let's say we're going to return to paracetamol. It gives you a warning that says the selected product is batch managed. You say okay, not a problem. And we've put in our code, and it automatically attaches the description. Source location is from staff health. That comes automatically from the header information. And then in the destination, we need to indicate where we want the items to go. And you have all the locations inside UniField. You have your stock locations, you have your quarantine locations down here for scrap, analyze, and you have your customized mission-specific locations, as well as destruction, and then the generic or the default med and log. So in this example, we're going to say these items need to return back to the med stock so that they can be used for further needs, future needs. So we say source location staff health and the destination location med stock. Then we come over to the quantity, and we will indicate that 1,000 quantity of paracetamol are being returned. And finally, we have to look down here at the batch number and see if these are a batch that already exists in the system, or if we have to create a new batch. So you could select one of the existing batches already, or if this batch is not part of the system, then you would create a new batch here. For this case, I'm going to choose the existing batch with an expiry date of September 2022. And at that point, you've finished all the necessary encoding here. You've indicated the batch, the quantity, the item, where the items are being returned from, staff health, and where you would like the items to go inside UniField, med stock. In that case, I save and close, and it adds one line item to the document. And the document's still in status draft, which means you can review the item, decide, make sure that everything is correct, and you can continue to add additional items. Now let's say you had the scenario where the number of items being returned from the client is many. And in that case, you may benefit from using the import function. So for that example, we will use the import lines function. However, before we do that, we need to find the template that you can use to facilitate encoding this. So on your USB UniField library, you should have a folder that has import templates. And inside that folder, you'll see one that's for incoming shipments. So let's take a look. Here we are in the USB key. You have folder number 1, import templates. If you open that one, you'll see that file number 4 is the incoming shipment template. And this is the file that you can use to create the import for the incoming shipment. Now, to save time, I've already opened the file and created an example of 3 items that we want to import into the UniField, including the code, description, quantity, batch number, and expiry date. So once you've encoded the items, a key piece that's important on this file is columns I and J. That's going to be the source location and the destination location. So the source location should also be the same as the client that we indicated originally on the incoming shipment at the header level. And that's going to be this information right here, the staff health. So you need to type that in exactly how it appears in UniField, so it's an exact match. So I will type staff health. And you put it as the source where these items are coming from for each line. And then you also need to indicate on the import file where these items need to go. And so in this case, it's going to be med stock. And this again has to be typed exactly as the stock location is written inside the software. So we know it's med. And once you've done that, you've basically indicated the items, the quantity, any batch numbers required, and then the source location, and then finally the destination location. Once you've done that, you have a completed import file, and you just need to save it, and then you can import it. So I'll save my file and say yes. And then I'll go back to UniField and we'll prepare to import. Okay, so once you're back at UniField, after you've created your import file, we'll come to import lines. And then you simply need to add the attachment. Choose file. And I saved mine here. Give me shipment. And finally, import file. And you'll have this % completed information bar, and to get an update, you have a button here that says update. So you click on that, and it will say 100% completed. And then over here you have the details, and I can see from the first line that it's the number of imported lines is 3 of 3. So that means there's no problems. So I close the window, and it takes me back to the incoming shipment, where I can see here is the first line I did manually, and then here are the 3 lines I encoded using the import file. And if I wanted to check, I could simply open one of these lines, and it would show me the information that was encoded on the import file, source, destination, quantity, etc. Okay, so I can see that it's all correct. And finally, with this document still in draft, before I can process it, I need to confirm it. So I'll come over here. Once I agree and have reviewed all the information and it's correct, I confirm. And now it looks like any incoming shipment that you're probably familiar with processing from purchase orders. So the items still have not been returned to stock. All we've done at this point is create the document that contains the information for the items we want to return. To actually have the items updated in your stock levels, you'll have to come over and click on process. So one additional filter before you process is you have this physical reception date field. If this date is different than the day you're encoding, so let's say the items were returned physically to the warehouse on a Friday, but you didn't have time to encode it, and you did the encoding on the following Monday. In that case, you could use this field to indicate that these items were received on a different day physically then they were actually encoded into the UniField. It helps us have a more accurate record of the movement of items. So we'll say that these were received on a Wednesday and we're encoding on a Friday. So now I come and it's time to update the stock level, so I click Process. And we're going to say that all the items have been received. So I'll copy all. So it's taking all my ordered quantity and put it all in the quantity to process. I look at the rest of the information, and here it will say other types, and that's okay, because this is going to put the items in the destination location that you indicated when you created the incoming shipment. So then all you have to do to finalize and update your stock levels is click on the Process button. At this point, the document is closed. The items have been moved, as you can see here, to the MedStock location, and if you need an export, you have the Excel export here, and you also have the PDF version here in case you need to sign this and update your archives. And here you can see, like with any incoming shipment, you have a specific reference number for this transaction, and you still have you can always pull this up and look at it at any time in the future if you need to see the historical information, and it's under reason type 4, return from unit. So just to show you on the incoming shipment dashboard, kind of the list view, you also have a filter over here for reason types. So if you want to see an overview of all of your return from units, you can select that filter and click on search. And we'll see that in this sandbox we've processed 2 or 3, and then the one we just did was here, incoming shipment number 82, and the reason type return from unit. So this is a way that you can kind of follow if you need to filter differently and see the items that have returned. This usually isn't a transaction that has to happen every day or even every month, but there are times when items were sent out of stock and the client makes the decision that they want to return the items to be managed in stock so that the next requester can have access to them. And so that's when you would use this function of the incoming shipment from scratch, as we call it, or also the return from client. So finally, there's just a few things that I want to emphasize when you're encoding a return from client. And to do that, I'm going to open up a new template. And as we did before, you have the header information that starts off blank at the top. It's very important when you're choosing the reason type that you choose the number 4 return from unit. If you accidentally choose any of these other types, the loan, especially the loans and the donations, that'll cause a problem when you're trying to extract your data and the reports won't generate correctly. So when you're encoding a return from unit, make sure that you select number 4, and that'll prevent you from having any issues. And then again, you choose your external consumption unit, and that indicates that this is a return from unit, specifically which unit? The staff health unit in this case. Using this functionality, the incoming shipment from scratch is really the most efficient and the best way to encode items that need to be returned to stock from a client, and you want your stock levels updated with the correct batch number, expiry date if necessary, then this is the technique you would use to encode that. If you need more information on this, you have additional resource available in your UniField USB library key, which is here. So if you were to go to your library key, you would see in folder number 2 the UniField manual. In this case, we're interested in the incoming shipment, so we go to the chapter 5 warehouse. And when that opens, you can Control F, and if you type in incoming shipment, It will take you to the chapter that discusses all the details of how to encode incoming shipments. And specifically, we're interested in how to create an incoming shipment, which is on page 13. And then you'll find the section how to create an incoming shipment. And this will go through the same details as discussed in the video. So you can use this resource along with the video to help you in your future encoding needs.